Hi, I'm Austin and welcome to my channel.
The little girl wasn't watching where she was going. She was 5 years old and running like the hospital hallway belonged to her, her small feet slapping against the polished floor, her braids flying behind her. She didn't see the wheelchair until she had already crashed into it. The impact stopped her cold. The woman in the wheelchair was old, sharp-eyed, and surrounded by men in black suits who moved instantly, hands raised, bodies shifting to shield her. But the old woman lifted one hand, and they stilled. She looked down at the child. Why is a child running loose in a hospital? Her voice was thin, but it cut like wire. And whose child is this? The little girl slowly lifted her face. Mrs. Shin stopped breathing. She had seen that face before. That jaw, those eyes, that particular way the brows sat, slightly arched, slightly serious even in a child's round face. She had looked at that face every day for 30 years. She had watched it grow from a boy's face into a man's. Why? She didn't finish the sentence out loud. Only in her head, the question rang clear. Why does this child look so much like my grandson? Before she could say another word, the little girl had pressed both hands to her knees, bowed her head low, and said, "Sorry, grandmother. I'm very sorry," then spun around and ran back the way she came. Mrs. Shin turned to the guard on her left. "Get Baekhyun, now." Then she turned to the one on her right. "Find out who the mother of that child is. I want to know before this day ends." Maya ran until she spotted her mother's back, then slowed to a guilty walk. Laura turned around before Maya even reached her. Mothers always knew. "Maya." Her voice was quiet but firm. "Were you running?" Maya pressed her lips together. "No." "Maya." "A little bit." Laura exhaled and crouched to her daughter's level, straightening the collar of her little dress. "I told you, this is a hospital. People are sick here. You could knock someone over." She didn't know how right she was. "Sit right here and don't move." "I mean it." "Yes, Mummy." Laura kissed her forehead, stood, and smoothed her skirt with both hands before walking toward the doctor's office. She knocked twice and let herself in. Dr. Choi was already seated, folder open in front of him, and the expression on his face told Laura everything before he said a single word. She sat down anyway. She needed to hear it. "Mrs. Kim's condition has progressed faster than we expected," he said. "She's going to need surgery. The longer we wait, the more complicated it becomes." Laura kept her face still. "How much?" He told her. The number hit her like a door to the face. She didn't blink. She didn't let herself. She just nodded slowly and said, "I'll find it." Dr. Choi looked at her the way people looked at her a lot lately, with that careful mixture of sympathy and doubt. "Miss Laura, if it's a matter of time, I'll find it," she said again, more firmly this time. She had applied to 11 jobs in the past 3 weeks. 11. Not when I called her back. Her savings were almost gone. Her mother's hospital bills were stacking up on her kitchen counter like a judgment. But she wasn't going to sit in this office and cry about it. Not here. Not in front of this man. She thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out. She stopped at her mother's room first. Her mother was asleep, small and still under the hospital blanket, her breathing slow but steady. Laura stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long moment. She thought about all the mornings her mother had gotten up before the sun to make sure Laura had food before school. All the time she had said, "We're fine, my darling. We always figure it out. We'll figure this one out too." Laura whispered to the sleeping woman, "I promise." Then she went back to collect Maya, took her daughter's small hand in hers, and walked out of the hospital into the gray afternoon. Across the hospital, in a private wing where the floors were quieter and the staff moved with practiced invisibility, Mrs. Shin was spiraling. She had the photograph in her mind. That child's face. Those eyes. That jawline. She had turned it over and over in her head, and every time she reached the same conclusion, and every time it made her heart do something strange. Her phone had been ringing. Her secretary. Her housekeeper. 3 missed calls from the board of the Shin Family Foundation. She ignored all of them. The only call she made was to her head guard. "Did you find anything?" "Still working on it, ma'am." She hung up. When the door to her room finally opened 20 minutes later, she was sitting perfectly upright in her wheelchair, hands folded, face composed. She had been preparing this conversation. Baekhyun walked in looking like he had come straight from a board meeting because he had. Tailored black suit, top button undone, the faint crease between his brows that appeared whenever someone pulled him away from work. "Grandmother." He leaned down and pressed a brief kiss to her temple, then straightened. Your guards told me it was urgent. Are you feeling worse? Should I speak with your doctor? Sit down. He sat, reluctantly. I found a child today, she said. Baekhyun's jaw shifted. He knew this tone. He had been hearing it for years. Every time she spotted some baby at a family function or saw a child in a commercial or read something in the newspaper about his cousins having their third kid. He loved his grandmother, but this particular version of her tested every ounce of his patience. Grandmother. This child looked exactly like you. You've said that before. About the Kim's boy, the child at Jisu's wedding, the Baekhyun. Her voice stopped him cold. She never used that tone with him. Not the scolding one. The serious one. I am not being dramatic. This child stopped my heart. I thought I was looking at you at 5 years old. He exhaled slowly. Even if that were true, what does it have to do with me? You've been trying to have children. His expression closed off immediately. Don't. His voice came out flat. 3 attempts with 3 different women over 4 years, and nothing has worked. She pressed on before he could shut her down. What if it wasn't about you? What if there is already a child out there? What if your ex-girlfriend had your child and never told you? The temperature in the room changed. Baekhyun stood up. Don't, he said again, but this time it came out lower. Rougher. Don't bring her up. Baekhyun, I've told you. I've told everyone. Don't bring her up in front of me. He was already at the door. Mrs. Shin watched his back, watched the tension in his shoulders, the rigid line of his spine, and she felt the familiar ache of watching someone she loved carry weight they refused to put down. I'll send someone to check on you tomorrow, he said without turning around. Then he left. In the back of his car, the city moved past the tinted windows, and Baekhyun stared at nothing. He didn't want to think about her. He never wanted to think about her. And yet here he was, because his grandmother had said her name, and now the dam had a crack in it, and everything he had spent 6 years building up was leaking through. Laura. He had met her at 28. She had walked into a charity event as a volunteer, not a guest, wearing a dress that clearly didn't cost much, and standing in a room full of people whose watches cost more than most people's cars, and she had not looked intimidated by a single one of them. That was the first thing that caught his attention. Not her face, though her face was striking. The way she stood, like she belonged exactly where she was. They had talked for an hour that night, then 2 hours. Then he had found excuses to see her again and again until 5 months had somehow passed, and she had become the most constant thing in his life. He had told her things he had never told anyone. He had brought her to things he had never brought anyone to. He had started to build plans that included her without even noticing he was doing it. Then one morning she was gone. No argument, no warning, no letter, just gone. He had searched for her, quietly, because he refused to let anyone see how badly it had undone him. He had told himself she was like everyone else, that his grandmother and his father had been right about her, that she had seen what she wanted and taken it and left. He had told himself that story every day for 2 years until he almost believed it. Then he heard she had a child. That was the thing that had finally made the resentment solid. Not the leaving, not the silence. The image of her somewhere out there, moving on, building a life, holding somebody else's baby. That image had turned the grief into something harder and colder and much easier to live with. He had not let himself love anyone since. He had tried to have children the clinical way, the practical way, because love had proven itself to be a liability and children were something he still wanted. But even that had not worked. 6 years, and his grandmother wanted to tell him about a child who looked like him. He pressed the back of his head against the seat and closed his eyes. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then he did. Yes. Good afternoon. This is HR at Shin Group. We're confirming an interview appointment for tomorrow morning at 9 for the executive secretary position. Is this Miss Laura Kim? Wrong number. He ended the call and told his driver to take him back to the office. Laura stared at the email confirmation on her phone while Maya slept in the seat beside her on the bus. Shin Group. Of all the 11 companies she had applied to, the one that called back was Shin Group. She put the phone face down on her knee, looked out the window, looked at Maya's sleeping face, looked back at the email. She knew what Shin Group was. She knew exactly what it was and whose name was on the top floor. She thought about ignoring the email. She thought about calling back and saying she had accepted another offer. She thought about every possible exit from this situation, and then she looked at her bank balance, and she looked at her mother's face in her memory, and she thought about the number Dr. Choi had told her. She picked the phone back up and confirmed the appointment. She told herself it was a big company. He was the CEO. CEOs didn't sit in interviews for secretary positions. She would go in, impress whoever was actually interviewing, and be out before anyone who mattered even knew she was there. She was wrong about almost all of it. She knew the second she walked into that conference room. There were 4 people at the table. 3 she didn't recognize, and 1 she would have recognized across a stadium in the dark. Baekhyun. He was older, sharper. The boyish softness that had been around his eyes 6 years ago had settled into something firmer, more contained. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, and he was looking down at the folder in front of him when she walked in, and for exactly 2 seconds, Laura considered turning around and walking straight back out. She didn't. She sat down. She answered every question they asked her. She spoke clearly and evenly, and when a man on the far left asked her to walk them through how she handled a previous high-pressure project, she did it without a single stumble because she was a professional and she needed this job, and she could not afford to fall apart in this room. Baekhyun asked her nothing. He sat with his pen resting between 2 fingers and looked at the table mostly and occasionally at her, and his face gave away nothing. Nothing she could read anyway. But she felt his attention the way you feel a fire when your back is to it. The other 3 interviewers exchanged small nods. Words like impressive and exactly what we need moved around the table. Baekhyun said, "She'll be my executive secretary." Everyone looked at him. Laura felt her heart drop to somewhere around her ankles. "Effective tomorrow," he added, and returned to the folder. She was walked out by HR, shown the contract. Given a start time, she signed everything with a hand that she forced to stay steady, and then she walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood very still and waited. The doors closed. She pressed her back against the wall of the elevator and exhaled for what felt like the first time in 40 minutes. "Laura," she whispered to herself, "what have you done?" But her mother needed surgery, and the number was sitting in the back of her mind like a stone. She straightened up before the elevator reached the ground floor. She could do this. In the conference room, the other interviewers had filed out. Baekhyun stood at the window. He had sat across from her for 45 minutes and kept his face exactly where he needed it. Blank, professional, unreadable. Inside was another matter entirely. The moment she had walked through that door, something had lurched in his chest, and he had hated himself for it. He had wanted to say her name. He had wanted to stand up and cross the room and demand to know where she had been for 6 years, and whether she had ever thought about him even once, or whether she had simply moved on the way it seemed like she had. He had done none of those things. Instead, he had given her the job. He had given her the job because the other 3 interviewers were right. She had performed brilliantly, and it would have raised questions if the CEO had been the only one against hiring someone this qualified. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was smaller and more shameful, and he wasn't going to look at it directly. He wanted to watch her quit. He wanted to put enough pressure on her that she would walk out the same way she had walked out 6 years ago, and then at least he would have proof, clean and clear, that he had been right about her all along. He picked up his phone and told his driver he'd be down in 5 minutes. Laura didn't sleep well. She lay in the dark with Maya curled up against her side, one small arm thrown over Laura's stomach, as she stared at the ceiling and let the memories come because she was too tired to fight them off. 5 months. That was how long they had. Dinners where he had talked about his grandmother like she hung the moon. Sundays where they had done absolutely nothing and it had felt like everything. The night he had said, "I think you ruined me for other women," and laughed like it was a joke, but looked at her like it wasn't. His father had called her to a meeting, alone, without Baekhyun's knowledge. He had been polite about it. That was the part that had stayed with her. How polite he had been while he dismantled her. He had listed every reason she was wrong for his son. Her background, her finances, her future. He had talked about the kind of woman Baekhyun needed, and every sentence had made it clearer that she was not that woman and never would be. Then she had found out she was pregnant. She hadn't told anyone. She had sat in her bathroom with the test in her hand and thought about what it would mean. A baby, Baekhyun's baby, entering a family that had already decided she was beneath them. The things they would say about her, the things they would do. She thought about her child growing up in the middle of that, watching his father's family look at his mother like she was something that needed to be cleaned up. She had packed her things in 2 days. She had told herself it was the right decision. For years, she had told herself that. She looked at Maya's sleeping face in the dark. She had been wrong. She had been so wrong. She should have stayed. She should have fought. Instead, she had taken the path his family cleared for her and called it her own choice. And now she was here, 6 years later, taking a job in his building because she had nowhere else to go. She pulled Maya closer and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, she was going to walk into that office, and she was going to do her job, and she was not going to cry or break or let him see even one crack. She owed him that much. She owed herself that much. She dropped Maya at school at 7:45, kissed her twice, reminded her teacher she might be slightly late for pickup depending on traffic, and took the train to Shin Group. By 8:58, she was at her desk outside Baekhyun's office. By 9 on the dot, he walked past her without a word and into his office. The door didn't close fully. She could see him through the gap, sitting at his desk, already on his phone. His assistant from the day before appeared at her elbow with a warm smile and a stack of files and a very rapid explanation of what the role usually looked like. And Laura absorbed it all and nodded and picked up her pen and began. By 9:30, Baekhyun appeared in the doorway. "My coffee isn't on my desk." She looked up. "You didn't ask for coffee. My secretary knows to bring coffee." She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stood, walked to the small kitchen down the hall, made the coffee exactly the way she had made it for him 6 years ago because she had never forgotten, and brought it back. He looked at the cup, then at her. Something moved in his face and was gone. "The Mercer file," he said. "I need the summary redone. The format is wrong." She looked at the summary she had just spent 40 minutes organizing. Which part of the format? All of it. She sat back down and started again. This was day 1. Day 3, he sent back a client brief she had written and asked her to remove all bullet points and rewrite in full paragraphs. She did. An hour later, he sent it back and said he wanted bullet points. She printed both versions, walked into his office, placed them both on his desk, and said, "Which would you prefer, sir?" without a single trace of emotion in her voice. He picked one without looking at her. She took the other and walked out. Day 5, he told her she would be attending a 6 o'clock meeting and needed to prepare minutes. She had already called the school twice about late pickup. Maya's teacher had been understanding, but the worry in the woman's voice was a slow leak in Laura's chest every time she heard it. Laura prepared the minutes. She sat in the meeting for 2 hours. She typed everything. She compiled it, formatted it, sent it before she had even collected her coat. Then she ran. She took the stairs instead of the elevator, and she flagged a taxi, and she called the school on the way, and she got there at 8:43 to find Maya curled up in her teacher's cardigan, asleep on the reading mat in the corner. Ms. Park looked up when Laura came in, and the relief on her face lasted exactly 1 second before the gentle concern replaced it. "She was very good," Ms. Park said quietly. "She kept asking me what time Mummy was coming." Laura crouched down next to her daughter and touched her face. Maya stirred and opened her eyes, and when she saw her mother, her whole face softened into something so pure and so trusting that Laura had to breathe through it very carefully. "Mummy," Maya murmured. "I'm here, baby. I'm right here." She gathered her daughter and carried her out to the taxi and held her the whole way home, even though Maya was getting almost too big to be held like this. Day 7, he called her into the office at 4:55 and handed her a contract and told her to restructure it for a meeting the next morning. She stood with the contract in her hand. She knew what time it was. She knew what time school ended. She did the calculation in her head, and her stomach dropped. "Is there a problem?" he asked, not looking up from his screen. There were 50 things she could have said. She said none of them. "No, sir." She went back to her desk. She restructured the contract. She finished in 40 minutes and left it on his desk in an envelope, and then ran. She was 22 minutes late this time. Maya was sitting outside the school building on the front steps with her backpack on her lap and her eyes on the gate. When she saw Laura coming, she stood up. "You're late again," Maya said. "I know. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Ms. Park had to go home." "I know. Baby, I'm sorry." Maya looked at her. Then she reached out and took her mother's hand. 5 years old and already choosing to forgive so quickly. Laura blinked hard and held her daughter's hand all the way to the bus stop and didn't let go. Day 9, she was restructuring a presentation at her desk when she heard him walk past behind her. That template is outdated. She looked at the template she had been given by his own department. "I was sent this by your design team. Get a newer one. Where from? That's your job to find out, isn't it? She turned slowly in her chair and looked at him. He was already walking away. Day 10. He handed her back a client communication and told her the tone was wrong. She read it. It was not wrong. She had been doing this for 10 days. 10 days of sending things back for no reason. 10 days of unexplained overtime. 10 days of running to the school and carrying a half-asleep child home on public transport and falling into bed at midnight and doing it again. 10 days of looking at her mother's hospital bill and her account balance and talking herself out of quitting every single night. She rewrote the email. She sent it. She went back to her desk and sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up the next task. It was the 11th day when something broke. She was in his office with a report she had spent the entire morning on, and he looked at it for 30 seconds and told her to redo it. She looked at the report in her hands, then at him. What needs to be changed? It needs to be redone. Which section? What specifically? Miss Laura. He looked up then, fully for the first time in 11 days. I said redo it. Something came loose inside her. Is this a crime? The words came out quiet, almost conversational, but the room temperature shifted. Becky looked at her. Is it a crime, she said again, her voice barely shaking, to need this job? Because that's all this is. That's the whole of it. My mother is in that hospital needing surgery, and I need to pay for it. And I applied to 11 places, and you were the only one who called back. And if you want to fire me, then fine. But can you tell me what I've actually done wrong? The silence was total. Becky set down his pen. What I've done wrong, he said slowly. You want to know what you've done wrong? In this job, yes. Because the work I am bringing you is not bad work, and we both know it. His jaw tightened. You want to talk about what's been done wrong, Laura? You left. The words came out low and hard. You left 6 years ago without a single word. Not a note. Not a call. Nothing. I thought you were different. I told you things I've never told anyone. I spent months believing you, and then you were just gone. He stood up, and then I find out you moved on so fast you had a child with someone else. So yes, maybe I've been harder on you than I should be. But don't stand in my office and talk to me about what's been done wrong. Laura didn't move. The tear came without warning. One, down her left cheek. She didn't wipe it. She reached up slowly and unclipped her ID badge. She set it on the edge of his desk. She picked up the report. I resign, she said quietly. She walked out. The rest of Baekhyun's day was useless. He sat through 2 meetings and retained nothing. He answered 4 emails and couldn't have told anyone what they said. His lunch sat untouched on the corner of his desk. He kept seeing her face. That tear, the way she had stood there and not defended herself, not attacked him back, just quietly taken off her badge and put it down. What was his business if she had a child? That was her life. That had nothing to do with the work. He had used it against her because he was angry, and he had been angry for 6 years, and he had taken out on her every day for 11 days, and she had shown up every morning and said nothing and done the work and said nothing. He rubbed his face with both hands. He was picking up his phone to call HR when his assistant knocked and entered with a cream envelope. Courier delivery from Mrs. Shin, the assistant said, and set it on the desk. Baekhyun looked at the envelope. His grandmother had been calling. He hadn't answered. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. He turned it over. His grandmother's handwriting on the back, shaky but clear. I told you the child looks like you. And isn't this Laura? He flipped the photograph. In front of school gate. A woman with long black hair and a little girl beside her. The girl looking up at the woman with both arms raised, and the woman bending to pick her up. The woman was Laura. The little girl had his jaw, his exact brow line, his nose in miniature. She was wearing a yellow dress, and her hair was in 2 braids, and she looked like someone had found a photograph of him at 5 years old and colored it differently. Baekhyun sat completely still. The report Laura had left on his desk was still there. Her ID badge was next to it. He stood up. He walked out of his office, past his assistant who said something he didn't hear, to the elevator, down to the car park, into his car. Drive, he said. Where to, sir? He looked at the photograph. The school name was visible on the gate behind them. He read it out. As fast as you can. He made it in 19 minutes. The final school bell had just gone when he pulled up outside. Children were beginning to come through the gate in small groups, collecting into the arms of parents and grandparents and babysitters. He stepped out of the car. He saw them almost immediately. Laura was coming through the gate with the little girl beside her, the girl's hand in hers, the girl's yellow backpack bouncing with every step. Laura was looking at her daughter, saying something, and the girl was laughing at whatever it was. Then Laura looked up. She saw him. She stopped walking. The little girl stopped too, looked at her mother first, then followed her mother's gaze. Becky stood on the pavement and looked at the child. The child looked back at him, her head tilted slightly to one side, the way he'd been told he did when he was thinking. His eyes, studied him with a seriousness that sat strangely on a 5-year-old's face. Then, slowly, she asked, "Is this Daddy?" The word hit him somewhere under his ribs and didn't stop. He crossed the space between them in 3 steps, and he dropped to his knees on the pavement, and he pulled the little girl into his arms and held her. She stiffened for exactly 1 second, surprised, and then her small arms came up around his neck, and she held him back. He couldn't speak. He pressed his eyes shut and held his daughter for the first time, and the 6 years collapsed into nothing, and all that was left was this. Laura stood above them. Her hand had come up to cover her mouth. She was shaking. "Maya," he said. His voice was not steady. "Is your name Maya?" The little girl pulled back to look at him. "What do you know my name?" He looked at her face. He couldn't stop looking at her face. "I just know." Maya considered this with great seriousness. Then she said, "You look like me." "I know," he said. "I know." He stood slowly, still holding Maya's hand, and he looked at Laura. Laura's eyes were full. Her chin was trembling slightly, and she was pressing her lips together the way she always had when she was fighting something back. He reached out with his free hand and said, quietly, "Come with me. We need to talk." She looked at his hand. She took it. They went to a small cafe 3 streets from the school. Not somewhere anyone would recognize him. Not somewhere with glass walls and a view and the kind of lighting that made everything feel performative. Just a quiet place with wooden tables and soft music and a corner booth where Maya could sit between them and color in the small book Laura had pulled from her bag like a reflex. For a while, none of them said anything. Baek-yoon watched Maya press a red crayon very deliberately inside the lines of a flower. His daughter. The word still didn't feel like it fit inside his chest. Too large, too much, and yet there was no question in his mind. There had been no question from the moment she looked up at him outside that gate. Laura sat across from him with both hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "She doesn't know," Laura said finally, keeping her voice low. She asked just now, but she's 5. She says things. She glanced at Maya. She doesn't know what it means yet. Becky nodded slowly. Maya looked up and pointed her crayon at him. "You have a sad face." He blinked. "Maya," Laura said gently. "He does." Maya studied him with complete sincerity. "Like when Mummy thinks I'm asleep, but she's sad." Laura looked down at the table. Becky looked at Laura. He had so many things to say, and all of them were stuck somewhere between his throat and his chest. He looked at the woman across from him, and 6 years of carefully constructed resentment was sitting in a pile at his feet, useless because the child between them had her mother's mouth and his everything else, and none of the story he had told himself for 6 years made sense anymore. "Tell me," he said. "Just that." Laura looked up. Her eyes were dry now, but barely. "Tell me what happened." She told him. She started at the beginning. The meeting with his father. She watched Baek-yoon's face when she described it, watched the way his jaw tightened and his eyes went very still, and he said nothing, just listened. She told him what his father had said. All of it. Not the softened version she had replayed in her head over the years. The one where she gave his family the benefit of the doubt and told herself they were just protective and didn't mean it so badly. The actual version. The precise way his father had listed everything wrong with her. The tone. The politeness of it, which had somehow been the worst part. The way he had been so calm and so sure, like he was simply telling her the weather. Baek-yoon's hand had closed into a fist on the table. "He never told me," he said. "Quiet. Dangerous quiet. I know. He never said a single word to me about," he stopped. "Breathed. I would have. I know." She said it softly. "I think I knew that even then. That you would have fought them. That's part of why I left." He looked at her. "I was scared," she said. "Not of your family winning. I was scared of what it would do to you. Being in the middle of that. Fighting your father for someone like me, and then one day resenting me for it." She looked down. "I know that probably sounds like an excuse. It sounds like a decision you made for both of us without asking me." She nodded. "Yes, it was. And it was wrong." Maya had stopped coloring. She was looking between them with that same serious expression, too young to understand the words, but old enough to feel the weight in the room. Laura reached over and tucked a braid behind her daughter's ear. "When did you find out?" he asked. She knew what he was asking. 3 weeks after I left. She kept her eyes on Maya. I sat in a bathroom for a long time, and I thought about everything. What your family had said. What would look like me coming back pregnant. The things they would say about me. Her voice stayed even through effort. I kept thinking about this child growing up watching her father's family treat her mother like she was something that needed to be dealt with. I didn't want that for her. So instead she grew up without her father. The words landed between them without cruelty, but without softness either. She absorbed them. "Yes," she said. I told myself I was protecting her. I think I was also protecting myself. From having to fight. From losing. She finally looked at him. "I've regretted it every single day, Baekhyun. Every day. I should have stayed. I should have told you and let you decide and fought alongside you instead of just disappearing. I know that now. I knew it probably 2 months after I left, but by then I had convinced myself it was too late." He was quiet for a long moment. Maya had gone back to her coloring, satisfied for now, her small feet swinging under the chair. "I look for you," he said. Laura went still. "For almost a year. Quietly, because I didn't want anyone to know how much He stopped. "Tried again. I told myself you had left for money. That was the easiest version. That you had seen what you wanted and left. Everyone around me said that's what it was, and eventually I let them be right, because the alternative was worse." "What was the alternative?" "That you left because you loved me enough to think leaving was the right thing." He looked at her steadily. "Which, knowing you, is exactly what it was." She pressed her lips together. "Then I heard you had a child," he said. "Someone mentioned it. I don't even remember who. And that was the thing that finally made me stop looking." He looked at Maya. "I thought it was someone else's." "There was no one else," Laura said. "There has never been anyone else." The cafe was quiet around them. Soft sounds. A cup being set down somewhere. Music too low to make out. Baekhyun looked at his daughter, who had now filled in a flower entirely in blue and was examining it with great satisfaction. 6 years, he said. "I know. I missed 6 years." She didn't try to fix that. She let be what it was. Maya looked up abruptly and held the book out to Baekhyun. "Do you want to color this one?" She pointed to a butterfly on the next page. "I always mess up butterflies. Maybe you're better." Something moved across his face. Laura watched it happen, watched the hard thing in him soften at the edges, just slightly, just enough. He took the book. He took the crayon she offered him, and very carefully, he began to color the butterfly, while his daughter watched critically and offered commentary. Laura watched them both, and she let herself, for the first time in 6 years, feel something other than regret. They stayed in that cafe until Maya fell asleep against Laura's arm. Then they stood outside on the quiet street, the evening coming down around them, Maya balanced against Laura's shoulder, heavy and warm and completely unconcerned with any of it. Baekhyun stood in front of them. He had his hands in his pockets. He looked like he was turning something over, weighing it the same way he used to look when he was about to say something he had been thinking about for a long time. "I want to be in her life," he said. "Whatever that looks like. However we have to arrange it. I want to be her father." "I know," Laura said. "I want that too. I should have made that possible a long time ago." He nodded slowly. Then he looked at her, just at her, not at Maya, and she felt that the way she always had, that particular quality of his attention like the rest of the world had been set aside. "I treated you badly," he said. "These past 11 days. You didn't know. I knew you were struggling. I knew your mother was sick. That's what you told me in the office today, and instead of hearing it, I used it." He exhaled. "I wanted you to quit. I want you to know that. I made your days harder on purpose because I wanted you to walk out the same way you walked out 6 years ago, and I thought that would make me feel something other than what I actually felt every time you walked in." She looked at him. "What did you actually feel?" He didn't hesitate, like no time had passed, like you'd never left. He looked down briefly, which made me angrier. She almost laughed. It wasn't funny, but it was so deeply him, that particular brand of emotional logic, that the laugh wanted to come anyway. "I don't want to keep being angry at you," he said. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know what it looks like from here. But I know that the last 6 years without you made sense to survive and didn't make sense for anything else." He stopped, steadied himself. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He stepped closer. He lowered himself until he was on one knee on the pavement, right there, in front of the cafe with the evening traffic going past and Maya asleep on her mother's shoulder. He looked up at Laura, and his face was open in a way she hadn't seen in 11 days, in a way she hadn't seen in 6 years, in a way she had spent a long time missing without letting herself call it that. I know this is not the right time, and I know we have to rebuild a lot of things, and I know I don't deserve to ask this yet, he said, but can we start over? Please, can you let me try again? There were people walking past, a couple who glanced over, a man on his phone who didn't notice, the world going about its business entirely indifferent to the two of them. Laura shifted Maya slightly on her shoulder. She reached down with her free hand and took his. Get up, she said softly. Get up, Baek-yeon. He stood. It wasn't your fault, she said, her voice breaking at last. The thing she had been holding together for 11 days and 6 years, and the entire length of this conversation finally giving way. None of it was your fault. I left. I made that choice. Don't kneel for something that was my fault. The tear came, and she didn't stop it. He reached up and caught it with his thumb, his hand warm against her face. Then let's stop counting fault, he said. Let's just start. She leaned her forehead against his for a moment, Maya between them still asleep and unbothered. And she said, okay. Just that. Okay. But it was the most she had ever meant a single word. What came after wasn't a fairy tale. It was better than that because it was real. They were slow about it. Careful. They had a daughter to think about and feelings that were old and complicated and needed to be looked at properly before they could be built on. They talked more in those first weeks than they had probably talked in the original 5 months, all the things that had never been said, all the conversations that should have happened before she packed that bag. Maya adapted with the terrifying ease of children who don't yet know things are supposed to be complicated. Within 2 weeks, she was calling him Appa with complete confidence and tugging him toward whatever she needed help with. She appointed him her official butterfly colorer and was generous enough to allow him other pages when she felt he had earned them. Baek-yeon went to see his father. Laura didn't ask him to. He didn't tell her he was going until after. But the conversation he'd had was one he should have had years before, and his father, older now and less certain of himself than he'd once been, had said less than Baek-yeon expected and had looked smaller than he remembered. He came home that evening and sat at Laura's kitchen table while she made tea, and Maya showed him a drawing she had done at school. We don't have to pretend that part of the family doesn't exist, he said to Laura. Not in front of Maya. Later, after Maya had been put to bed. But they don't get to decide anything for us. Not anymore. I know, she said. I should have made that clear 6 years ago. To them. To you. We were both younger. That's not an excuse. No, she agreed. But it's part of the truth. He nodded. Then he picked up his tea, and they sat in her kitchen in something that felt like peace, or the early shape of it, which was enough. Laura's phone rang on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the cafe. She looked at the screen. The hospital. Her heart clenched. Miss Laura, it was Dr. Choi's assistant. We're calling to confirm the date for your mother's surgery. Mr. Beck has taken care of the arrangement. She stood very still in the middle of her kitchen. The arrangement, she repeated. Yes. The full amount was transferred yesterday. We were told not to contact you until everything was confirmed. A pause. Your mother's surgery is scheduled for Thursday. She sat down on the kitchen floor. She didn't plan to. Her knees just made the decision without her. She sat there for a moment, phone still at her ear, not saying anything. Miss Laura, are you still there? Yes. Her voice was steady somehow. Yes, thank you. I'll be there Thursday. She hung up. She called Baek-yeon. He picked up on the second ring. Laura, you paid for my mother's surgery. A brief silence. The invoice came to my office. HR forwarded it when you resigned. I redirected it. Baek-yeon, I know you didn't ask me to. I need you to know that I wasn't. That this wasn't why She stopped. Started again. I need you to know I didn't come back into your life because of money. I never wanted anything from you except. Laura. His voice was quiet and certain. I know. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. She's Maya's grandmother, he said simply, and she raised you. That's enough reason. She sat on her kitchen floor for another full minute after they hung up. Then she got up, washed her face, and called her mother to tell her the surgery was Thursday and that everything was going to be all right. The surgery went well. Mrs. Kim spent 2 weeks in recovery, and Laura was there every day, sometimes with Maya, sometimes alone. Baek-yeon came twice, bringing food that was too good for a hospital waiting room, and sitting with Laura in the corridor without needing to fill the silence with anything. The second time he came, her mother was awake enough to look at him properly. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Maya, who was sitting beside her hospital bed, eating a biscuit and explaining in great detail the plot of something she had watched. Then she looked back at Baekhyun. "You look like her," she said. "Everyone says that," Baekhyun replied. Mrs. Kim smiled. The first real smile Laura had seen from her in months. "Sit down," she told him. "You look like you've been standing outside too long." He sat down. Maya immediately redirected her explanation of the cartoon at him, since she now had a larger audience. Baekhyun followed the plot with what appeared to be genuine attention. Mrs. Kim watched Laura across the room, and Laura looked back at her mother, and something passed between them that didn't need words. They got married on a Saturday in late spring. Small. That was what they both wanted. A room full of people they actually chose, not people chosen for them by obligation or family structure, or who would take offense at being left out. Mrs. Shin came in her wheelchair and cried before the ceremony had even started and then denied it to anyone who mentioned it. Laura's mother sat in the front row and held Maya's hand. Maya wore a yellow dress because she refused any other color and had made this position extremely clear over several weeks of discussion. She also insisted on walking her mother down to Baekhyun, which was not a traditional role for a 5-year-old, and which she performed with complete seriousness, one hand in Laura's, the other swinging slightly. When they reached Baekhyun, Maya looked up at him, then at her mother, then back at him. "You can have her," Maya said. The officiant lost her composure briefly. Baekhyun crouched to Maya's level. "Thank you," he said, completely seriously. "I'll take good care of her." Maya nodded, apparently satisfied, and went to sit with her grandmother. Later, after the reception, after Maya had fallen asleep on Mrs. Shin's lap and been carefully transferred to a car, after the last guest had gone and the venue was quiet, Laura and Baekhyun sat outside in the late evening air. She had taken off her heels. He had loosened his tie. They were sitting on the steps of the venue with the garden in front of them, and the sky going a deep and settled blue above it. "I thought about this," she said, "when I was on a bus with Maya in those early years. I would think about all the ways it might have gone differently. And sometimes I would think about what it would look like if I had stayed. If we had made it." She looked at the garden. It didn't look like this. It was blurrier, less real. He turned to look at her. "This is better," she said, "even with all the hard parts. This version is better." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I used to think about the day you left. Go back to it, turn it over. What I missed. What sign I should have seen." He leaned back on his hands. "I stopped asking that somewhere around the cafe with Maya, asleep on your shoulder, and a butterfly, I had a color. Seemed like the wrong question after that." She laughed quietly. "She still has that book." "I know. She showed me last week. She's added to it. She does that. It's a whole system." He looked at her, the way he used to, the way that had always made her feel slightly unsteady. "We wasted 6 years," he said. Not bitterly, just as a fact. "Yes, we're not wasting anymore." She leaned into him. His arm came around her. The garden was still, and the air was soft, and somewhere inside the building their daughter was sleeping the deep and total sleep of a child who had been thoroughly happy. "No," she agreed. "We're not." The love that had never really left finally had somewhere to stay. Not the careful love of two people feeling their way around each other's edges. Not the aching love of wanting something just out of reach. But the daily, unhurried, undefeated kind. The kind that had already survived the worst of what they could throw at it. The kind that colored butterflies very carefully inside the lines. The kind that showed up.
Today's story teaches us that fear and silence can separate people who truly love each other. But honesty, forgiveness, and genuine love can still bring healing and a second chance. It reminds us that real love is not about perfection. It's about staying, understanding, and choosing each other even after the pain and mistakes. That's it for today's story. Kindly like and subscribe. Love you all. Bye. See you in the next one.